Collecting all information produced previously in a hard form, reports, planning, documents, legal documents, maps, satellite images, aerial photographs, and old photographs, is almost always the best way to start the PCRA process. Such materials, sometimes referred to as secondary information, are valuable. Often, a great deal of good quality information already exists, allowing the researcher to substantially reduce the number of or to redirect assessment activities. Plans for PCRA efforts in the field should therefore be kept open until after an appraisal of existing documented information has been completed. It is also critical to evaluate the existing information and to use relevant and current but not obsolete reports or data. Government documents such as ordinances, regulations, plans, and other documents related to the legal CRM regime are important indicators of past and present government involvement or non-involvement in CRM. The information they provide is useful in identifying government management strategies and evaluating the success of previous and current government CRM activities. Scientific studies in ecology and/or socioeconomics are also prevalent and useful. These studies provide information on the status of coastal ecosystems and the living and working conditions in coastal communities. For PCRA purposes, this information is considered as baseline, for example, a starting point in determining the long-term impact of CRM efforts. Using the right contact persons and/or letters of introduction is always helpful. When collecting information, always respect and credit the rights and wishes of the source, promptly return any borrowed material, and respect the wishes of a source to be or not to be credited when the information is presented to others. Although the CW might find it difficult to track down all the existing information, the CW might view this activity as contributing to the development of a broader definition of community, or what some call institutional strengthening. In accomplishing this task, therefore, the CW should have a twofold objective. 1. Gather extensive, good quality information as practical, and 2. Develop relationships with and between scientists, government workers, and other stakeholders that can be used beneficially in the CRM process.
Community entry and preparation. This handbook assumes pre-existing proficiency in community entry and other aspects of effective community organization and development in Philippine coastal communities. Following are the recommendations specific to successful application of PCRA. Number 1. Attempt PCRA exercises only in communities where a significant amount of community development has already accomplished. There is a strong interest or where community organizers are available and willing to serve as interfaces. Number 2. Consider fishers and other resource users who participate in PCRA as local consultants and collaborators and not just beneficiaries. Treat them with appropriate respect as essential contributors to the CRM process.
Participant observation. The process of participant observation entails entering a group of people who share a common identity to gain an understanding of their community. Researchers can gain an understanding of a group by spending time with them and closely observing their actions, speech patterns, and social norms. Participant observation involves observing and documenting what occurs in the community. Community workers can glean a wealth of information about resource assessment by actively participating in daily life in fishing communities. Many of the constraints and opportunities considered in CRM planning become more apparent and their subtleties more appreciated when the community worker interacts with the coastal resource systems as a participant. Effective participant observation necessitates efficient note-taking. These notes should be reviewed and filed regularly in preparation for the production of a coastal area profile. Participant observation should be viewed as a method that can be used in conjunction with any of the specific PCRA techniques. Interviewing approaches, the don't and do's. Don't. Do not barge in or take a note without the permission of the community. It is viewed as suspicion and resentment by the residents living in the area. Do's. Avoid suspicion or resentment. A warming up period should always precede participant observations involving notebooks, videos, and an audio recorder. Appropriate precautions must be taken so that community residents do not get the wrong impression from the participant observation methods used.
Individual or group interviews are a component of each of the techniques discussed in the subsequent sections of this report. Interviews can be used to gather credible data for resource assessments and to improve communication in support of community development and institutional improvement. Effective communication enables all parties involved in CRM to view the issue objectively, significantly facilitating management planning decisions. The CW's challenge is to communicate effectively with everyone they come into contact with. They are the ones who facilitate communication between local resource users and national government officials or NGOs. These challenges are significant as effective communication results in accurate information and contributes to the growth of communities. Individual and group interviews are conducted concurrently with other PCRA procedures, with various objectives and information concerns. However, in all interview situations, the goal should be to improve general communication and information accuracy. Initially, interaction is typically one-sided, as the CW is the one who initiates contact. Those being questioned will progressively acquire knowledge about and from the interviewer, if not directly, then indirectly through the questions asked. Furthermore, the CW conducts follow-up interviews to solicit input on information gathered from various sources. PCRA acts to enhance profile data further by cycling it through a range of stakeholders, generally acting as an intermediary and/or interpreter. It is occasionally prudent for CWs to conduct preliminary interviews with individuals such as key informants or those identified by local authorities as knowledgeable about coastal resources. Interviews should be undertaken with resource users who have a variety of specialties, such as spear fishing or fish farming, or who have a long history of understanding about the resource. This will mobilize all available local talent, integrate resource users from across the management region to avoid overlooking minor details. Following the individual interviews, CWs can engage in group activities to gain a better understanding of the coastal resource system. Group activities help CWs, workshop attendees, and eventually the general public understand the problems associated with the coastal resource management. Assuming that everyone who utilizes this guidebook has had training in conducting interviews, only a few points remain. Respect your interviewer's time, ideas, and intellectual property rights. Permission should be sought to record interviews, even in notebooks and particularly on video or audio. At all costs, avoid bias and judgment. Capture the interviewer's exact words during the interview. Interpretation and analysis can come later. This handbook is not about participatory action research. Rather, it is about facilitating a two-way flow of knowledge between CWs and local participants, as well as among participants themselves in group or workshop settings. Following the collection of objective local data, CWs can begin discussing various aspects of the coastal resource system with the local fishermen and soliciting their input. To reach agreement on a piece of information, a group typically requires members with divergent viewpoints. This typically entails altering and strengthening local perceptions, which requires time and patience. In conducting this particular interview, One must know to view themselves as part of the community, not as individuals learning from or teaching local fishermen.
Conducting household surveys. Household surveys are questionnaires distributed to a sample of population's households. Their main benefit is that they provide the interviewer a lot of flexibility when it comes to the information they need from responders. Surveys can be done by local or national government agencies. In this particular matter, surveys are done by locals or national government agencies to have a better background in the society, environment, as well as the jobs and needs of the people in the area. Sampling of a minimum of 10% of the total household. It is not necessary to conduct a survey to the whole population in a certain area because it takes a lot of time. At the same time, the 10% of the households involved can illuminate significant changes in the community that have occurred since the survey was conducted. Also, surveys are most useful when applied in different ways at different times. At the start of a project, it is usually best to do a general survey, one that gives a broad overview of demography, livelihood, and community organizations, as well as general resource information such as types of resources harvested or cultured and their production amounts, the gears used in production, and the numbers of people involved in production or area. Later in the life of the project, more focused and specific surveys can be useful. By revealing the participants' exact preferences, attitudes, and abilities, surveys at this point can help planners decide which projects and other interventions will work best in the communities as presented in the appendix. Here, a socio-demographic profile questionnaire and fishing practices survey form contain a comprehensive list of potential questions. Identifying and classifying resources, habitats, and other environmental factors, the identification and classification of coastal resources and other aspects of coastal communities. Importance of having a household surveys. Household surveys are currently the most important data source for a variety of key demographic and socioeconomic statistics for developing the marine environment, in which essential questions are asked to the respondents about how they manage and adapt to that specific environment, and how local and government agencies respond to the rehabilitation or status of the marine environment, as well as the people adapting to the environment.
Hi, I am April Joy Relativo, and now I will discuss the topic identifying and classifying resources, habitats, and other environmental factors. So, in order to complete the other procedures of PCRA successfully, the identification and classification of coastal resources and other characteristics of coastal communities is an absolute prerequisite. It is essential for local resource users and experts to have a clear knowledge of what a particular local name or term relates to the scientific world and vice versa, if they are to collaborate effectively. For example, if it is not made clear which types of fish are included in the generic phrase like isdang bato or what specifically bahura implies, there can be uncertainty and as a result, undesirable PCRA results. Additionally, there are often unique names that are only used in a single location, in addition to common phrases that have meanings that vary from place to place. Consequently, the CW must become proficient in communicating knowledge to those outside of the organization. Once the most essential aspects of a coastal resource system have been identified, it is typically possible to categorize these elements to a considerable extent and discover the structural relationships that link the various names and terms. See Figure 2.3. The CW gains insight into how local fishermen see the coastal resource system and thus their behaviors and decisions. So, for example, certain fishers may not consider bakaw or mangrove to be ayamang dagat, literally sea wealth. If the CW is unaware of this, the term may not be understood correctly. Another example, consider one society where a sunu is a type of lapu-lapu, a fish, or a yaman dagat. If the CW is unsure whether a sunu is a different species or part of lapu-lapu catch, inaccuracies in estimating fish catches may arise. Hence, photographs and field trips to habitats are effective tools for ensuring that English and indigenous terms refer to the same ecosystems. Classification of habitats does not have to be hierarchical. A listing will suffice initially. Later, features can be named and a more accurate approximation of the habitat classification can be achieved through the use of diagrams and photographs. Apart from involving interpreters to enable correct communication, natural scientist support is also critical for acquiring an understanding of the habitat regimes unique to each particular location. Next, when classifying resources, uses, gear types, and conflicts or issues, it is best to approach each category sequentially at the start of the mapping exercise. Whenever possible, it is advisable to address each category consecutively at the beginning of the mapping process when classifying resources, uses, gear types, and conflicts or issues. It is possible that the use of identification guides, particularly for fish and shellfish, will assess the CW in focusing on the correct names for diverse resources. In order to clarify the meaning of these phrases, the users must identify and describe the various uses in gear kinds. A field visit may be necessary to do this. Thus, a listing of issues should also be identified through mapping and interviews. In summary, identification and categorization should be performed in the following order, starting with the most fundamental features and progressing to the most specialized one. First, habitats. Second, resources. Third, uses including gears, livelihood, and opportunities. And lastly, conflicts, issues, or problems. Next, spend time simply listening to the local stakeholders discuss the coastal area and their livelihood. Identifying and classifying environmental elements is simple. It is quite particular. The interviewer's bias is minimized by moving from general to specific. There will be time afterwards for interpretation and analysis of the data acquired. So always remember that the interviewer's initial focus should be on documenting the expertise of local stakeholders. Listen to the local stakeholders discuss the coastal area and their livelihoods before doing the interview. Visit the coast to clarify terms and concepts. You should eventually be able to discover a group of terms that appear to be significant to the local knowledge system. After gathering significant terms from open discussions, ask a series of more detailed questions about them. This will teach you more about the terms' local usage and relationships. In order to determine all of the different types of eggs that are significant in the coastal community, the following would be the first question you should ask yourself. Number 1. What kinds of eggs can one find in your area or community? If A, B, and C are identified as being kinds of eggs, then ask Number 2, what kinds of A are there? Then what kinds of B? And so on. To help In identifying and correlating local terms to scientific terms, one can ask, how does A differ from B and C, and so on. After asking a number of these kinds of questions, you would be able to see a structure in the way the terms are related. You can draw a tree or cascade diagram that shows that A, B, and C are kinds of X, and that there are several kinds of A's, B's, and C's which appear to correspond to various scientific terms.
The tree diagram that emerges from careful documentation of local systems is crucial for converting local folk knowledge into science. The domain, for example, is the most generic class in which the scientific equivalent of coastal resources belongs. The isda is a type of yamang dagat. Therefore, it is also a domain to which other fishes such as lapu-lapu, belong, and it serves as a domain for numerous different kinds of fish. Once the local system is understood, it is important to find as many scientific equivalents as possible. This requires a discussion of the unique features of the domain. The identification and classification procedure might be added by looking through a book of images or drawings, especially for living creatures like fish. Although photos and pictures are usually helpful for identification, samples are even better. So beyond the coastal resources themselves, the same method of identification and classification can be applied to a variety of elements of the coastal community. When socio-economic elements such as forms of livelihoods or production methods are examined, the procedure can provide some intriguing results. After the domain has been classified such as pamamahayan o paninirahan ng yamang isda or types of coastal resource habitat, it may be interesting to discuss what makes each member of the domain uh, coastal resources unique or what differentiates the different classes. A transect diagram is one method of differentiating features, and it depicts geographical cross-sections of coastal ecosystems or their habitat, spanning from deep sea to beaches and mangroves. So the habitats are represented by the horizontal axis, while the resources, economic opportunities, and issues connected with this habitat are presented by the vertical axis. In addition, transect diagram in a new diagram to the mapping exercises. The transect diagrams in the vernacular are similar to views of a region habitats from a fish eyes perspective.